Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and welcome once again to an RPG product review. This time, we're taking a look at another offering from Black Oath Entertainment, who were kind enough to send me a review copy of Riftbreakers, a tabletop RPG suited for solo, group, or GM-less play. It is a fantasy tabletop RPG set in a world inspired by computer role-playing games, and especially MMORPGs. Riftbreakers is available as a PDF from DriveThruRPG, and this review will be based on version 1.65, which has undergone some corrections. But before we get into the review, I'd like to take a moment to thank channel sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is a set of web-based tools to help gamers, authors, and other creatives with world building. It has templates for various articles, including characters, locations, and lore, interactive maps and timelines through the Chronicle system, organizational charts, and the ability to make random tables. There is support for over 45 role-playing game systems right out of the box. Gamers will find it easy to organize, track, and share campaign information with their group. All of the tools used for world building for gaming can also be used by authors and other creatives to help build plot and story events, and even monetize their world by offering exclusive access to articles, stories, and more. I could even see indie computer role-playing game designers building their world design bible with this. World Anvil has a few pricing tiers suited for different needs, and right now you can get 40% off of any yearly subscription by using coupon code RPGCrawler when you sign up with my link. And with that, let's take a look at Riftbreakers. As mentioned, it is a fantasy role-playing game set in an MMORPG world, similar to an isekai or a similar setup. As such, it has a bit of a different tone than previous things I've looked at from Black Oath, although it uses what appears to be an evolution of the system presented in Broken Shores. As always, we'll take a look at the layout and presentation, go over a brief summary, and then cover each section in more detail. At the end, I'll wrap up with my thoughts on Riftbreakers overall. The PDF clocks in at just under 300 pages, with a full-color cover and indeed a full-color interior. The text is presented in a mix of single and two-column entries interspersed with inline art, full-page art near chapter breaks, and full-width tables. Indeed, the formatting contains a large number of tables, since MMORPG style of the setting favors video game-like info blocks on everything from items to powers to creatures. The placement of art and section headers do make it easy to find the general section you're looking for on any cursory search. In terms of contents, Riftbreakers is broken into 8 main sections. There's Welcome to Riftbreakers that sets up the system's background and its core features, followed by The Characters, which walks through character creation in a step-by-step video game tutorial style. The Rules covers the core rule of the game, while Gameplay Procedures gives information on dealing with quests, rifts, crafting, and so on. Gear and Loot covers the various equipment and special loot available, while Cathor describes the setting Riftbreakers takes place in. The Bestiary offers a variety of creatures one can encounter, while a first step is an introductory Rift Seed. In more detail, the Welcome to Riftbreakers chapter starts with a brief description of the game and fantasy RPGs in general, explains the concept of attempting to recreate the feel of MMORPGs like World of Warcraft and the Elder Scrolls Online. It also lists off several of the subsystems one can expect as a result. The chapter continues by introducing some basic tabletop RPG concepts, describing the basic structure of characters in Riftbreakers, and covering the different sorts of dice one can expect to use. There's a very basic touch on the D100 system Riftbreaker uses, the importance of a balanced party while dealing with Riftbreakers combat, as well as an introduction to the heart system that Riftbreakers uses to allow for characters to be customized. It closes out with a reiteration on how dangerous the setting of Cathor can be, and a brief summary of the core features of the Riftbreakers system. The Characters chapter is the first of the 3 major chapters I'm going to cover in real depth. It presents the character creation in Riftbreakers. Interestingly, it does so in a sort of video game tutorial format. After a brief explanation that the characters arrive without memory in the center of a labyrinth, it starts a series of alternating narrative setup interspersed with game rule descriptions. The first step is Appearance, which gives several tables of quirky features that can be used to vary a character or for inspiration, and then attributes are covered. Riftbreakers uses a set of attributes very similar to a D20-based game, including Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Will, Intelligence, and Charisma generated by a 3d6 roll. However, as the game is D100 based, these are then multiplied by 5 to give a range for tests. Each attribute has an associated test, and what those tests may be used for is gone into, with Strength covering feats of brawn, Dexterity for coordination, Constitution for vitality, Will producing tenacity, Intelligence covering intellect, and Charisma used for charm rolls. There's also a set of derived attributes based on combinations of the core 6. Aether is used for spellcasting, health is of course a character's hit points, luck is not really derived from attributes, rather increases via in-game effects, and he is used as a sort of modifier for found equipment and other certain roles. Speed covers how fast a character can move, while stamina is used to fuel certain special moves. There are also damage modifiers, strength for melee and dexterity for range, that operate more like a classic D20-based system. The next step starts introducing equipment, with a selection of starter gear for the character to pick up. This is where we see our first set of weapon stats. Stat blocks in Riftbreakers are very reminiscent of video game style blocks, with gear given a name, a rarity, and a tier level, damage or defense, cost, and a brief description. The cost is in a currency type that will be gone into in a bit, but another thing to note is that Riftbreakers makes use of usage dice, a mechanic that has become a bit more popular with more rules-light systems. Skills are then selected, although this is done by means of a few potions that give bonuses to sets of skills, effectively giving an in-character explanation for having certain skills above others despite the character having no memories. The skills are then listed, with each skill giving an associated attribute as well as a description on what they do. There's also some coverage of what armor and weapon skill proficiencies do and the penalties suffered for using gear that a character is not proficient with. After this, the narrative goes into a sort of sample combat against a newbie creature just to get a handle on the combat system. This gives an introduction into two things, a creature's stat block and character titles. Character titles are earned through certain story elements or by accomplishing certain tasks, and a character may only wear one of their available titles at any time, with that title giving a minor bonus. It's effectively another gear slot. Creature stat blocks are given in a format of name, description, and then relevant rank, number appearing, creature type, speed, size, its skill at combat, as well as relevant ability checks for coordination, intellect, tenacity, vitality, their health, and their dodge ability. Any attacks are given in a sort of move format with a description of what the attack does and its damage, and then a loot table is given, or in some cases just a loot number for currency dropped. This is common where creatures show up, and I'll probably touch on it again in the bestiary. Now, I know I just said that the narration actually begin combat here, but it actually doesn't cover the combat itself, or the rules necessary at this point, so I guess it's up to you as to whether you play it out or just assume a win, but it's then followed by a simple set of test skills. This shows how to make skill tests in-game. The narration then gives an option of 4 hearts to take. While Riftbreakers is classless, hearts offer a sort of character customization similar to class. A character can have up to 4 hearts over the course of their life, each of which grants access to certain abilities, which may be unlocked in a series of tiers, and each of which effectively grants the core abilities of a class or archetype, but without the corresponding limitations, allowing you to combine the abilities of multiple archetypes given enough time. The difference between the at-will talents, the per-encounter powers, and the daily primes, each heart can give, they're basically gone into, along with how to unlock a heart's various abilities, with various essences that can be acquired as loot. After this, each of the hearts is gone into, with the heart's various abilities described in a sort of almost spell-like format. Each heart gives a basic flat bonus, then talents, powers, and primes are shown in stat blocks, given names, types, costs, range, actions required, and that can span over a few rounds if needed, the effect that talent has on each character rank, and a brief description of what it does. The heart section covers all hearts, not just the starting ones, which is good for when you need to refer back to it later so as not to have to go to different sections of the book. The character creation narrative then goes into a more proper combat, with a tougher, more fleshed out creature that gives a proper view on what a creature block looks like. It wraps up by having the newly created character taken into the setting's main town, Kar Halos, and given an opportunity to join their first faction, with the choice of a secondary heart if they do, as well as a new title. This is where the character title and achievement system are touched on. The characters section closes out with character advancement. Riftbreakers uses ranks rather than levels, and experience earned is used to improve abilities. You don't increase a character rank directly, but rather rank up each of your abilities individually. Once all are ranked up and your hearts are fully unlocked, you can then rank your character up overall. There are 4 basic ranks applied to everything from characters to gear to even currency: Novice, Apprentice, Veteran, and Master. Ranking your character up grants a variety of bonuses, increasing your effectiveness against lower ranked creatures, increasing how many actions you can use in a round, boosting attributes, and so on. This is also one of the ways that Riftbreakers evokes MMORPGs, since creatures of a higher rank are innately very resistant to lower ranked characters, and nearly immune if the difference is more than a step or so. The last few portions of character advancement cover some basic ways to earn experience, and then touch on raising skills through skill books, as well as giving you a table of random skills in case you need them for said skill books. The next chapter, The Rules, covers the majority of the nuts and bolts of the system of Riftbreakers. Riftbreakers uses a D100 system similar to the one used in Broken Shores, and the chapter starts with an explanation of making checks, including difficulty modifiers and opposed checks. It covers how to make a group check where multiple characters can contribute, and then touches on basic critical successes and fumbles, although combat versions are covered in the combat section that follows. The combat rules are then gone into, and it is here that we see most clearly how all roles in this game are player-facing. A creature's combat skill is used as a modifier to checks. Characters make a roll to hit with their skills, and then when it's the monster's turn, they make a roll to dodge or to parry or defend. The combat system divides actions into free actions, that is basically actions that take no time, reactions actions, which are basically free actions that are done as a response and therefore penalties accrue the more that are taken, and then finally, proper actions. On their turn, characters can move and make one action around, although this can be added to with various abilities or at higher tiers, which means more experienced characters are vastly more effective. Character's defense is split between dodging and parrying, with the difference being basically that parries require the character to wield something that can be used as a parry. They use different attributes and whether penalties accrue or not. Armor effectively acts as mitigation rather than avoidance, and any time armor or a shield are used in combat, at the end of the fight an integrity check must be made to see if the quality degrades. This functions similarly to usage dice, just a chain of decreasing dice with a chance to decrease the value each time you roll on it. Rules for shield parries are covered, with shields being far more useful for parrying than other things that allow the move. There's a step-by-step quick reference section on the order of combat. Combat rounds use a sort of 10-second setup. There's rules for determining surprise and initiative, with a single initiative roll being used through the entire combat. The combat turn is then described in terms of options, with a mention of making attacks, using abilities, disengaging, and other general actions, along with rules for dual wielding, making unarmed attacks, ranged attacks, and underwater combat. The different damage types are gone over, which is very reminiscent of D20-based games, along with the concepts of vulnerability, resistance, and immunity, again reminiscent of D20-based games, especially the 4th edition thereof, which is understandable. Combat critical hits and fumbles are detailed, with crits resulting in double damage and fumbles requiring a roll on a table of weapon fumble effects. Rules for healing and death are given. Being styled after an MMORPG, characters effectively respawn without their gear back in town after a death, and must make a run to recover their gear from their corpse if it's an option. This also results in a loss of an attribute, which gives death at least some sort of penalty. The various conditions a character can be inflicted with are gone over, and then the fatigue system is covered, which is similar to the one in the 5th edition D20 systems. After this, attention shifts towards more general rules. Timers are presented in Riftbreakers for various purposes, and they use a dice chain system based on usage dice, identical to the one that I found so interesting in Broken Shores. There is a yes-no oracle system for a GM-less play given, along with an action and theme table that can be used to flesh out possibilities that come into play. A general NPC reaction system is given as well, similar to the one used in OSR-style games, but a little more detailed and with some options for helping to randomly flesh out an NPC that is encountered, with details on their nature, their motivations, their demeanor, and so on. The gameplay chapter is the 3rd major rules chapter and covers the more general rules of running a game, including the random generation of various aspects. It starts out with rules for overland travel. The world of Riftbreakers has a few different regions to travel to, although travel itself is fairly abstracted, just measured in days with a chance of events on each day. Each region does have its own modification to these chances. Tables are given for generating enemies, interesting places, things to find, and with further tables for each given region. The quest board is then detailed, which is basically Riftbreakers' random quest generation system. Quest types start at random, but you can build up reputation to eventually be able to choose which type you go on. Rewards are pretty standard, regardless of type, and the party rank, which is derived from the rank of the characters within it, play a part in determining the number of factors. Each quest type is then described: escort, delivery, monster hunt and patrol, and rift closure. Rift closures are the most involved and bring up the idea of rifts, basically pockets of magical other realms that can open up, full of monsters and that have a boss creature within. Details on generating rifts of different types follow, with special environmental rules, general descriptions, features, dangers, the sorts of monsters within it, etc. There's tables for landmarks and objects that are generally useful for exploration, before there's detailed rules on exploring actual rifts. The rifts themselves are essentially randomly generated dungeons, and there's rules for linking various areas of a rift as you explore, generating the monsters in each area, and then finding and generating the Rift Lord, or the boss, after which the entire rift closes. The crafting rules follow. There are 3 main crafting skills: alchemy, blacksmithing, and leatherworking, as well as a gathering skill, and all 3 of the main skills function similarly. Creating items of various rarities requires certain levels of skill, and a crafting station for the appropriate type, right tools, all the material components described in a particular recipe, and then time to craft based on days. Notably, it also requires aetheryte, the currency of the game, of a particular rank. More on that later, but rest assured that instead of copper, silver, and gold, you have aetheryte in novice, apprentice, veteran, and master ranks. The rules touch on gathering raw material, either by exploring the outer world and uncovering gathering nodes of various sorts, or acquiring parts from creatures you beat. The various materials are detailed, along with their rarity and any elemental aspects they may have, which is important for some recipes. The main difference between alchemy and blacksmithing and leatherworking is that alchemy creates single-use potions, mostly useful for restoring health, stamina, or aether, but also with the ability to create some certain effects. More permanent equipment utilizes an MMORPG style of various prefixes and qualities gone into more detail later. Followers and companions are then detailed. The system treats most followers as a sort of extra equipment slot, with the followers abstracted into NPCs that just provide a bonus or a bonus ability, at least while out in the overworld. Entering a rift with more than a limit of characters and NPCs is impossible. I think you're limited to 3? I can't remember off the top of my head. You'll have to buy the book and look. Anyway, companions, on the other hand, actually engage in combat and are treated as a more special case. There's rules for hiring followers, determining their loyalty, handing their rank, and what traits they can produce, with each follower of a particular trait giving a different bonus. This usually occurs pretty randomly, but can be forced by a character by issuing an order, which then reduces the follower's loyalty. Companions are more active characters and come in 4 varieties, similar to archetypes in MMORPGs. There's the Bulwark, the Controller, the Executioner, and the Mender. They operate similar to monsters, with a monster-style stat block complete with move table that determines what moves they use, and generally a sort of brief description of their tactics. The only thing I'm not entirely clear on is how their tests are rolled, although I presume it's a function of the character who hired them. The section then concludes with a table for generating follower names. For the rest of the book's chapters, I'm going to go fairly quickly, since there's a decent amount that simply boil down to various stat blocks. The Gear and Loot chapter opens up with an encumbrance system, though, that is abstracted, merely letting characters carry a number of items based on their strength. There's also a limit on item slots, effectively limiting characters to wearing 1 type of each slot, with 2 in the case of rings. The usage die system is described, pretty standard, just a chain of dice that reduce a step on certain rolls, and then the currency you've gone into. Aetheryte is divided into ranks like characters, and the rank of Aetheryte you receive is based on the rank of the quest or the monster you defeat. There's also a brief little mention of selling loot. The common gear one can buy outside of loot tables is given, with the weapons described by name, cost, damage, weight, when crafting materials are used to make it, and notes on the weapon's traits, which are much in line with the D20 style systems. Ranged weapons are dealt with similarly, but in addition have a range stat, and ammunition dealt with in usage dice rather than in actual quantities, not qualities. Armor lists the costs, name, protection rating, weight, and integrity dice, crafting material, and additional notes. Shields are similar, but have a parry bonus instead of protection rating. Other gear just lists name, cost, weight, and any special rules or requirements that piece of gear needs. The common loot tables are followed by magic item generation, which is used for both crafting and monster loot. Weapons and armor and other items are crafted in a certain number of rolls on various tables based on their rarity, and there's additional tables given for the generation of use of loot in tables. The magical properties give not only an indication of what that property does, but also the modifier it gives to the name in terms of prefixes, suffixes, etc., if any. There's also some magic item peculiarity tables just for aesthetic purposes. The general loot tables follow, and it's important to note that you can get magic items and aetherite, but also hearts to absorb to get more class abilities, as well as essences of various sorts, which are used to unlock the abilities from said hearts. There's also various other items that one can find above and beyond the normal magic item generation method, including the formula for crafting, manuals and skill books to grant proficiencies and bonuses, an extra dimensional bag for carrying things, etc. There's also some legendary items that, while not unique, definitely have abilities above and beyond the general magic item creation tables. The chapter concludes with a brief set of rules for an auction house system, which can be used to buy materials for crafting as well as other items. The Cathor chapter gives details on the settings world of Cathor. In brief, it's part of a continent where the characters are strangers and mysterious people who appear without memory in labyrinths. There are rifts, basically aether storms, that create pocket worlds that spit monsters out. It covers the history of the strangers who started appearing 50 years ago, the first of whom organized the others in an attempt to take back the lands from the encroaching magical storms and monsters. It covers hearts and their powers, gives details on the state of things in the present day, then details the city of Karhalos, which the characters operate from as a home base. Various districts are detailed, as well as a few city factions that can be interacted with. The other regions of Cathor are then covered, which quests you can take a party out to. There's the Iron Mist Forest, Bone Spire Peaks, Crystalline Plains, Violent Sands, and then the Labyrinth itself. The Bestiary chapter follows and starts with a table for picking a random monster type and determining a starting random monster targeting table to show who the monster is going to go after in any particular encounter. This is followed by an in-depth explanation of monster stat blocks that dominate this chapter. I went over the basics of this before, but each monster has a combat skill, coordination value for passing those checks, health, intellect, number of appearing, the size of the creature, its speed, its tenacity for dealing with magical effects, its monster type, and then its vitality. There's brief rules for learning a monster's weaknesses, as well as guidelines for converting an existing monster to a Rift Lord, basically a template that sits on the monster that turns it into a boss. The monsters are then described in turn, with page after page after page of stat blocks detailing basic stats, modifiers for what rank the monster is, and then action tables or moveset, as well as their loot table. Due to how lengthy each monster entry is, this does make this chapter quite extensive. The book then wraps up with a sort of first step adventure, which basically gives an introductory adventure / rift all in one. It details the background on the rift, a basic companion and follower that a single player can take with them, the details on the rift in order to generate it according to the prior rules, and then the quest reward for finishing it. And as you can see, it's just 2 pages. And that is that for Riftbreakers. So what do I think of it? Well, in terms of presentation, I do enjoy the art and the layout. I think it is very well polished, especially when compared to previous offerings from Black Oath. I know it's just a PDF, but so far each of these offerings has been getting more and more polished, and I can really appreciate this iteration of improvements. As far as the writing goes, I find it well written, save for a few of the aforementioned aspects where I wasn't quite sure the details, like how companions' attacks are handled, or the first tutorial combat is handled. Minor stuff all in all, but there's a lot to like about the way this one's presented. I especially enjoy the way that character creation is set up with a proper narrative that it resembles a tutorial that you'd see in any video game. It goes a long way towards immersing you in a world and setting in the tone of an MMORPG. The actual setting is set up on a little bit on the vague side, but it gives basically all the details that you need to run the game, so there's not really a complaint there. If anything, it very much resembles something you'd see in a Diablo-style action RPG, where you have regions that have certain expectations, but nothing really set in stone in terms of exact maps and the like, because it's usually just randomly generated on the way. Between this presentation and the lists of stat blocks for items and monsters, Riftbreakers mostly makes me nostalgic for the MMORPGs I used to play when I had time to play RPGs without being guilty about not recording them for YouTube. In terms of the system, it's a nice little evolution of the one that's been used for Broken Shores. The Black Oath system, such as it is, has seen entry into a couple of games now, and I think that there's at least another one that uses it that I will cover at a later date. Each time, the basic systems in Riftbreakers and those of similar games get a little bit more fine-tuned, a little bit more polished, and then adapted to that particular setting. I enjoy seeing the process. The system plays well, and it very much supports both solo and group play. I will say that the Rift Generation system in Riftbreakers is a little bit on the light side compared to some of the other random dungeon, ruin, wreck generation systems in prior Black Oath offerings, although it is perfectly serviceable. It trades a little bit of the abstraction from prior random dungeon generation systems for a little bit more logical exploration, and that will probably benefit in group play. With Broken Shores, I mentioned I'd loved seeing the underlying system in a fantasy setting, and while it's not really a traditional fantasy setting, Riftbreakers is close enough, and I am here for it. I did just enough elements of the D20 style systems to evoke that sort of familiarity, with the D100's resolution system setting it apart enough to be its own thing. The fact that it is so readily used either with a GM or without, with a group or solo, is just a bonus. Now I suppose I'd like to see it eventually boiled down to a standalone style system engine at some point. If it hasn't been already, I'll have to look into that. Now, do I recommend Riftbreakers? Well, if you're into the idea of an MMORPG rendered into tabletop form, it gets the job done very well. I absolutely do recommend it for that sort of play, although if you're into a more generalized fantasy, well, the system will work fine, but the narrative flavor that permeates the system will probably be a little wasted. There are other RPGs, in fact other RPGs from Black Oath Entertainment, that do that a little bit better. I've been covering stuff from Black Oath for a while now, and I am pleased to see that these releases evolve over time. While the individual settings may be hit or miss from a personal standpoint, the systems can vary quite a bit. I have actually come to really appreciate the quality and thought put into each of these games as they are produced. Now I just need to find time to take a look at the other branded edition of Sacrifice, and then Across a Thousand Dead Worlds sci-fi one that does not use a D100 system. I'll get to them eventually. Pretty soon, in fact. On that note, I'm going to wrap things up here. This has been the RPG Crawler with Riftbreakers. As always, I'll leave a link to where you can get it below. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment, got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye. And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.